Okay, so Elaine Sensei suggested that I share some reflections on the events of last weekend when we were up in Seattle, and then some of us learned of a special gathering that was taking place in Tacoma after the National Council concluded. And so Yumi, Hatta, Jeff, Matsuoka, and I arranged to get a ride over to the gathering. It was the Day of Remembrance for the Northwest, and it was held at the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. It's the largest detention center in the system of places that they're incarcerating the immigrants, asylum seekers, and so forth. And so they staged a gathering in front of that, outside the detention center, to express the concerns of the community. It wasn't just the JAs, it was people from various organizations that are trying to bring attention to this injustice that's occurring under the guise of national security, just like 80 years ago our parents and grandparents were subject to. So anyway, so that's what this is about, Sudo for Solidarity. And these are for sale, by the way. And so it's just putting to suggestion that people are going to make the effort to go to Washington, D.C. on the first weekend of June to stage an expression of concern. You can call it a protest or whatever you want, but anyway, to historically stand up, so to speak, and gain back our voice. Because as I participate in some of these rallies, you know, people mention, you know, how people lost their property, lost their livelihoods, and lost their home and so forth. But it occurred to me, I think our community also lost its voice. It was such a traumatic experience, as I interpret it, that people, you know, my parents, my grandparents, and so forth were so traumatized that they didn't want to talk about it. And it's taken how many generations to gradually realize, no, we can't stop and stand back in silence, just as the community around us during World War II stood back quietly. And I think this was also the situation in the Jewish community in America. Because when I went on the Israel tour, study tour, I asked the tour guides and leaders, what was happening in America during World War II when your relatives, you know, are literally being, exterminated. And then the rabbi, he says, that's why after the war, after the Holocaust, we realized we needed to organize and stand up. So that's why these various Jewish organizations began to appear. But there's an interesting thing that I realized also from that tour, because I asked one of the rabbis, do you notice, or are you aware that in America, most of the Western Buddhist teachers are Jewish? And he says, yes. And I asked him, why do you think that is? And his response was, because after World War II, after the Holocaust, the focus became developing Israel, establishing a land where the Jewish people can feel somewhat safe and secure, which is not the case. But anyway, so the focus was more on the politics of being Jewish. And they neglected the spirituality of Judaism. And as a result, the baby boomers, my generation, became seekers, looking to find some resource to address their spiritual concerns. And then they migrated east to Eastern traditions, got into Buddhism, Hinduism, and so forth. And they continued to engage in that spiritual life. And they now, today, being the talented, intelligent people they are, were able to articulate Buddhism in a very compelling, meaningful way. Yeah? You check it out. Go to the bookstores. and look for some Buddhism, and you'll notice that the authors' names are generally Jewish. But now we're having to try to generate our own voice too within the Shin tradition. So we have people like Jeff Wilson, Dr. Tai Unno, Dr. Alfred Bloom, and so forth, who have been able to write for the broader audience. Because my criticism of the publications we typically generate are like preaching to the choir. They're writing for people who grew up in the tradition. And so we could nod our head, oh yeah, no, that's having refuge, taking refuge in Amid and so forth. But not necessarily for a broader audience. And this is what I hope you guys would think about. How do you express your appreciation of your Shin Buddhist roots? Kevin? Yeah, so this is what I'm hoping for future generations, and this is what I thought I was going to stand up for by being a candidate for bishop. But as it turns out, the status quo, in my view, prevailed. So I'll be moving on. Content with giving it a shot, expressing the voice of what I hope to be the future generations of Shin Buddhists who recognize, just like Elaine Sensei mentioned, when they stood up at that National Council discussion and made a statement about what they feel are, and that's kind of a big word, moral responsibility is. But I think it's a way that you can describe compassion. It's having a sense of responsibility for each other. And anyway, with that, this is a quote that I've selected by the late Reverend Dr. Alfred Bloom. So it goes, in essence, Buddhism turns our attention to the inner nature of our lives. It does not look to the process of history for justification and meaning. It does not deny the present for an imagined future. Rather, it means to develop a sensitivity to all that is around us for the directions our experience offers. It means to be open to others, to work with them, to share with them. Finally, it means not so much to ask, what is the meaning of my life? But rather ask, how meaningful am I to others? In contributing to the building up of others, we attain our own stature. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. There was a symposium on prayer in Jodo Shinshu, and I had the nerve to ask one of the speakers, because they were talking about praying for, there's that expression, I pray for you, and that's in Shin Buddhism, you could use that kind of expression. So I asked her, what's the difference between Shin praying for others and Nancy Pelosi's praying for President Trump?